Okay. Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. I will call the FinCom meeting to order. And as usual, can I get an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And just a reminder, we are being video recorded and broadcast live. Is there any public comment before I open the floor for discussion of the articles? And no. Okay. One day we will have public comment and I will be happy. So, okay, actually, Cliff, Mr. Williams, you're up first. I do it in order of arrival, and your pal, Mr. McNeil, was here at first in the room. So, we look forward to hearing your thoughts on your two articles.
I'm going to hear my thoughts. That's dangerous. Well, you know what? I'll give up my handout.
Perfect.
Handouts. Works each other. How you doing? Good.
Thanks, Cliff. I know.
Shazam.
Thank you.
There you go.
He knows to watch on Channel 18, so maybe he's watching. Michael, this is for you.
All right, Clifford Williams, 18 William Street. I'm not sure what article I am. I left it at home. But I was just putting forth a citizen's article to entertain gasification of our C&D and solid waste at the dump. I think combined it's about 22,000 tons, something like that. Anyway, these gasifiers, they're made by a company, Sierra, out of California. The government, I guess the military has contracts with them. Due to the laws where we go like over in the Middle East, we can't leave our trash behind, so they just gasify all the trash. So there's no real residue, even though I looked at incineration first. There are some materials you can make roads out of, an inert type material, but the rest of it, it produces diesel fuel. They generate electricity, a product like natural gas where they use to run other things. So I've been busy, so I haven't had a lot of time, but I put this together. You can go on their website, you punch in what your tipping fee is, how much solid waste you have. Anyway, if it shows a profit at a tipping fee of $325 a ton. The different products it produces, I believe, let me put my glasses on. I think the operating expenses is about $1.2 million a year. But after it's all done, at least with this estimate, it's just an estimate, it produces or makes $6.3 million a year in different products, electricity, gas. So I thought we might indulge if you guys are anywhere interested in this, and I know we have to go in a different direction at the landfill. So I'll put this article forward and done a little homework, and this is what I've come up with.
Okay. Questions for Cliff?
Cliff,
Yes.
what kind of emissions per ton are coming out of this? And
It doesn't
what's
have
the
any
spread?
emissions. There's no emissions with the gasifier.
Okay.
The gas it produces is that somewhat like propane or diesel fuel or gasoline.
But are
or
you
hydrogen.
saying so you're saying that there's no exhaust whatsoever? Or
No.
Okay, so it's entirely self-contained.
Yep, it's a gasifier.
Okay.
It melts everything: tires, wheels, medical waste, hazardous waste, C&D. Gasifies it at 4,000 degrees.
Cliff, you have there's a capital investment number of $13.7 million.
Yes.
I am assuming that's for the plant that
Yes.
makes this?
Exactly. So if it produces, we're just throwing a number out that they come back through the calculations of 6.3 million, in 2.2 years, you've paid for the unit,
Okay.
which I think our bill at the landfill now is anywhere from $9 million, maybe to $12 million to run the landfill. So if we could just make that zero, let alone make $6 million, that would be a good start.
Yes. Forgive this question. If it was so simple, wouldn't the town have already done this?
I don't think this technology was really around 20 years ago. I think they've done it. They've caught on to this, and everybody's been, I think, working on it. And you can go on YouTube videos. They have a great YouTube video on this, and it talks about that, how the technology is advanced, even with incineration. We talked about emissions, where everybody's. They talk mostly about methane gas, where you put stuff in the landfill, it creates methane gas, where that's a bigger pollutant when it comes to global warming than even incineration. But this gasification prevents that.
Okay.
And I know we've been mining the landfill, instead of mining it, screening it, and burying the plastics again, we could just gasify them, make some electricity. So you're right, if it was that easy. So that's why I'm trying to entertain the fact that maybe now it is that easy or easier, or it's time to move in that direction and try to do some real homework and maybe go visit these people.
Have you taken this concept to the town through other channels previously?
No.
Just started here?
Yep.
Rob, other questions from FinCom before I ask Rob to give us his thoughts?
Not yet.
Rob, as you know more about it than I'm sure, well, at least than I do. I won't speak for the rest of my FinCom members.
Secret gasification experts?
Yes, I know you're secret gasification experts. Oh yeah, you guys put on your microphones too, please, Jill. Thanks. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you. And thank you, Cliff, for this article. The town has certainly, through its consultant, been working for some years, but most recently in the last 6 months, conducting monthly waste summary meetings. Started back in July, and every month we've been delving deeper into a lot of the different subject matter, from landfills to drop-off improvements to the waste sorts we've been doing. And one of the sessions was specifically on technology, which had to do with gasification, pyrolysis, and other potential options out there. And so we do recognize that things have certainly changed technology-wise in the last 20 years and continue to improve. Incineration was discussed as well, and right now incineration is a moratorium at the state level to do incineration. Does that preclude us from doing any kind of a pilot? I don't think so. Same thing with this gasification and/or pyrolysis. Is it possible the town could enter into some kind of a pilot effort somewhere down the road? Yes. So it's not off the table. It's something we're definitely considering. I would say, from my own place, we're working on a lot of future discussions for what happens with the waste services agreement when it expires in 2025. And part of that will be what the next operator will inherit. And I would say that would be a fantastic time to understand and to start to get into technologies that could look to the future. Right now, I would say under the existing waste services agreement, considering we've had 6 amendments to that agreement in its lifetime, and that we're trying to get all of our ducks in a row to understand what the next long-term contract is going to be, both in length and in scope. I would say that technology will play a role in some way. We just don't know what that will be. And I think this article sort of just jumps in with both feet, as opposed to taking a look at how we're going to get there. So it's definitely being studied, and I think we'll be able to answer how to adopt technology, hopefully before the next contract in 2025.
And when do you have to, when will you start the negotiations on the next contract? I mean, if it expires in 2025, do you start in 2022 in the discussions, or 23?
Yeah, so there's no negotiations. This is a bid process.
I'm sorry, that's what I meant.
Following procurement, but it's important to note that, because a lot of people feel like, this is just a monopoly situation that we would have to negotiate with the existing operator. In fact, it's something that we definitely need to go out to bid with. Not to say that we couldn't end up with the same operator, but it's something that we are still working to understand what that's going to look like. It's quite likely that in the next year we're going to be looking at working together to get a expression of interest out there, which will basically allow people to come forward and say, hey, we're interested in Nantucket, and we start to look at some of the ideas that are available out there that are either more efficient ways to run what we currently have out there, or some new ways to look at it.
Brian, what's the timing of the procurement cycle for something like this? Typically 18 months, 24 months?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Because it's a large contract.
It's probably at least 18 months or more.
Yes, please, John.
John will give you a much more refined answer.
Thank you. So the first thing I want to say is that the town has an existing contract.
Right.
And there's a minimum amount of solid waste that we have to deliver for processing, and it's a put or pay provision. You either deliver it or you pay for it. And so I think it's going to be exceedingly difficult to be able to institute a new technology under the existing contract that the town has. So I would certainly agree with Rob that the opportunity to do that is in 2025, when the existing contract is terminated, and then we can, I mean, it would be sooner than that, but you would generate a scope of services, right? Now, the other thing is, for an investment of this kind, you're probably talking about having to do another long-term contract. If you want the operator to essentially finance that for you, they're going to be looking for at least probably a 20-year contract. And then the rates that the town would pay would include the debt service on the operator building and operating that facility for you. In terms of the procurement, I think the 18 months clearly would envision a tremendous amount of work that the town has to do up front. To decide what the future of solid waste and recycling is going to be on the island. And then coming up with a scope of services. And I was just talking to Rob earlier about the challenges you'll face there, making sure that you have the technical and consulting expertise to put together a scope of services that is actually going to be feasible. And you certainly have those resources available through all sorts of consultants. But in my estimation, you probably are talking something in the order of what you were suggesting, 2022, maybe 2023, but in that time frame is when you really have to start gearing up, make the decisions which direction the town's going to go in, developing a carefully crafted scope of services. And then the actual bidding process would not necessarily be that long. You could probably do that easily in 6 months.
Okay, thank you, John. Other questions about this?
Rob, the existing contract, do they have any experience with gasification?
Not that I'm aware of. I know that that Waste Options has started to talk. They have partners with technology folks, but they're not active that I'm aware of in any of the technologies.
Okay. No further questions at this time?
Can I ask a
Please.
question of Cliff, actually? Cliff, you're not an engineer, right?
Close to one, but not. Nope.
Okay.
The classes.
Just reading, the Article 3060, which still says incineration, not gasification. So you're planning on modifying this on town meeting floor?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking, when you, like, this thing's, it's a play on words, this thing burns at 4,000 degrees, but it's called gasification. Incineration is still burning trash, but it's going somewhere else, so go ahead.
Well, and again, the Article 35, right?
35, yeah.
35, calls for the town to see if it will raise and appropriate money. Now, I mean, are you planning on modifying this and putting the $13 million investment? So you're gonna propose to town meeting that the town acquire one of these gizmos for $13 million and set up. I mean, I guess what I'm getting at, Cliff, is you sat on this committee. This seems, like you're leaping the Grand Canyon as opposed
Right.
to
Well,
proposing
getting,
an idea.
like you said, the technology's new and trying to narrow people down and get real numbers and like I'm building houses and have a kid. So I'm very busy. But you're right. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to maybe through your motion, $13 million. Absolutely. I mean, we can go big or go home with affordable housing for $20 million. I think we can spend 13 to get rid of our trash.
Okay, then.
So I'll just follow up. If we were to raise and appropriate $13 million and we bought this thing and it's not a waste options contract to operate it and you're busy, who's going to do it?
Well, I'd have to go out and see how these people operate. And again, you can make an appropriation and not really act on the appropriation. I mean, we vote this thing and say, we're going to do it. My point is, I'm not sure what grade I was in when we first started talking about what we're going to do with the landfill. I think half those people are dead, and it took us forever. We couldn't decide. We ended up with the mess we have now. So I don't think we should wait to move forward with the technology, because it'll be 2025, and it's kind of like you don't train the guy who's going out the door, 2 seconds before he leaves, the new guy. So you have to get this up and running or technology. Talk to town council. I mean, we'd have to make a deal because of the contractual agreement to somehow set aside an area and just see how one of these things works, or
I mean,
How many of these
think it sounds
things-
like, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, how many of these things are in existence now?
I don't know. I don't know.
It talks about that in here. They have a contract with the Army and with the Defense Department as well, so they've been, it's in his handout, I think. I've read about it before. So it is new, but I'm more interested in Rob about what these other technologies that our current provider has talked about as well. Like, is there a menu of, of options for future technologies outside of gasification?
We've actually seen no hard proposals from them. Again, just discussions about pyrolysis, the gasification or incineration, and all of them have really been at pilot scale to test. So, I think that would really be the most appropriate. I would never suggest to the town to jump into something that hasn't been tried first, to make sure that it's fully operational here and suits the needs fully before we would to make any recommendation to full scale.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. Any other questions? No? Okay. What I'd like to do, as an explanation, what I've been doing today is who arrives first gets to speak first. So Rob was first in the building, so that hence Cliff got to be first in the lineup. Mr. Lowell, are you here to talk about the hazardous waste? Because then you and Rob talk about that, and then you'll have to stay for your remaining articles, and Cliff, you'll have to stay a little bit longer, but I know you love FinCom, so you'll be happy to be here. So, Mr. Lowell, would you like to talk about the hazardous waste facility that's in your article? Because then Rob can also speak to that, and then we can let Rob go. And it's Article 37, for those of you following along.
Thank you, members of the committee. I'm Andy Lowell. I've proposed this simply being involved in the trades, out and about a lot. I feel that hazardous waste is being disposed of improperly in a lot of areas and a lot of forms. It's in job site dumpsters. Very recently, I've been told it's being found in porta potties on job sites. We know it's been, poured down the drain. It causes problems at the sewer plants. We're in a fast-moving environment here in the building trades and in the real estate market. Recently, I got a chance to tour Lucille Hayes' house, the land bank recently bought. Most everything was moved out. It's going to be closed on within the next day or two. The last thing that was in the basement was all the oil-based paints that have been used in the house over the years. Who collected it? When did they get it? Where are they keeping it? Until one of our collection days. I realize, compared to most municipalities, we have many more collection days than others, but we also do not have any neighboring towns where we can possibly bring our waste to. I think up to a year ago, you might have read some news about a dog finding some antifreeze in the moors somewhere. I believe the dog is not with us any longer. You may ask, how can we afford this? I say, how can we not afford it? It's long overdue. It should be part of our infrastructure. Does it have to be at the landfill? No. I didn't suggest that. I don't believe in the article. I did suggest that maybe it could be run by the Department of Public Works. Maybe the town could build the facility, sub it out to a private operator to run it. We're in the process of completing a tank farm out by the airport. I would imagine the tank farm has to meet about the same standards that a hazardous waste facility would need to meet. I do realize the standards are very high. The building has to be built in a certain way, meet certain building codes for the state. I have not crunched any numbers on this or looked into any other municipalities who have built one recently. I've estimated the size to be simply the size of a two-car garage. $1 million, that would be almost $1,700 a square foot. I know there was a comment from the health inspector that said it could cost $5 million. I think he's shooting it from the hip about as much as I am. So until some more research is done, I feel the ball should be rolling on moving in this direction.
Thank you. My first question to you was, where did you come up with $1 million? So I think you just answered. You anticipated my question, Andy.
Okay.
Other questions?
Mr. Lowell, you think that the current, I think it's bi-monthly collection of hazardous waste is insufficient?
I do, just because of convenience. There's houses that close at certain times. It may not work. Just as I had just mentioned, who's holding on to that hazardous waste from the house that recently closed until the next collection day? I feel our environment is too fragile to not have a convenient place to go to at least 1 or 2 work days a week, and a Saturday per month. All of our collection days are held on a Saturday. There are contractors who are never on this island on a Saturday that work here all week long. There are homeowners who are never here on a Saturday that own homes here year-round. I simply don't feel it's convenient enough to be every other month, and there's just too much activity going on, and we expect things too quickly. We need a convenient way for hazardous waste to be disposed of without there being any fears, without there being any reason to put it someplace where it doesn't belong.
Okay, further questions? Rob, could I ask you to weigh in on this, please, for us? Thank you. Don't go too far, Mr. Lowell. There might be further questions. Thank you.
All right. So I would say typically the town doesn't necessarily come forward and have a horse in the race. So if the town were to move forward in one direction or the other, I think we could certainly make recommendations of what would be most appropriate.
Sure.
I would start with obviously the current situation, which is 6 events a year, essentially April through December. And even this year, with a weather cancellation in December, we were able to reschedule in January. So, we do have a fair bit of flexibility to accommodate the needs of the people that are utilizing our current program. In speaking with DEP, and not just DEP Southeast Region, but DEP Boston, the town of Nantucket has, I believe, the most municipal events of any other of the 352 communities in the Commonwealth. In addition to that, the Select Board has elected to extend this to commercial, very small quantity generators, which is, it's just not, there's no other example of that in the state. So I would say that the town has really made this ability and to dispose of hazardous wastes convenient more than any other community. So that's not to be overlooked. And this is to the tune of about $15,000 to $20,000 per event. So it comes with a cost, but I would say it's a very reasonable cost when you take a look at the single source aquifer that we're trying to protect, and certainly that's important. We've, as part of our waste summit that took place over the course of the last 6 months, one of those events was focused solely on hazardous waste. And during that forum, we had actually probably the strongest participation among all the events that we held. Some of the really interesting points that were brought up were surrounding convenience. There was lots of discussion about convenience. Haulers discussed how they once provided this service to their customers, where they would actually pick up, as part of their regular routes, pick up household hazardous waste from clients and bring it out to our facilities during these events or just prior to these events. So they would they collect it from their clients, they would temporarily store it on their facility, and then they would take it out to DPW on the days we held the events. So they all said that process ceased when their insurance companies found out that they were doing this. It's not insurable, and it basically leaves their properties subject to questions about contamination. There's a lot of complexities about proper training and handling, even accepting these wastes, because they need to be properly identified. They need to be stored, a lot of them separately. And I think when we start talking about quantities and having staff that is available specifically to accept wastes at the convenience of when people arrive, is a real concern. And having capacity at a facility for a facility that would be open more than just the one-day event. And I paint it this way. So we wouldn't know at any given moment who's coming to our facility for that day to deliver stuff, and what happens when we reach a capacity of the facility that's designed to be convenient for people, and we would have to turn them away, and what happens then. So right now, we ask that the very small quantity generator commercial entities that are allowed to bring it to us essentially call us ahead and let us know what they're planning to take to us on that coming Saturday when we hold events. That helps our vendor, Clean Harbors, currently plan. Do they need one trailer or potentially two? Because if they need more than what they're planning to bring, we can't accept it. We can't store it on site. And what is it? So there's some complexities there. The people that come here that are hired to do this under state procured contract are professionals. They're trained to do this. This is what they do every day. This is not what DPW does every day. And in order to get to that high level of training and maintain that, you're talking about some very specialized and positions that are not part of the current union contracts. So there's some complexities there to overcome. And I think the other part of this that was discussed was at the forum was more around the fast-moving building trades and real estate here on the island. And so it had to do with discussing off-island contractors rushing to the boat and not having sufficient or any facilities here on island to potentially temporary store either waste materials or materials to reuse on another day. And so there was some discussion about that. I would say that a combination of that and other factors would tell me that constructing this facility, wherever it would be located, would not solve that problem of being convenient for the folks that are too busy to take advantage of the programs that we currently offer. So I think that's the danger here, is to invest in something that we think is going to solve a problem without really getting a full handle on what that problem is to solve in the first place.
Thank you. Thank you, Rob.
Is there a standard unit of volume or weight, or how do you think of how much? I'm trying to wrap my head around how much hazardous waste there is on an annual basis.
Well, what we collect, I would tell you, is we generally have somewhere between 125 and 150 participants at each event, okay, which is rather high. Mm-hmm. It's pretty dramatic to me that we've maintained such a consistent participation as far as numbers go. Mm-hmm. It varies, the volume varies, but like each full load is considered, I think, 25 gallons. Okay. So it kind of, most residential participants are bringing in very small quantities for even a residence. So it may be a few cans of this or that, and might be considered a half load. From the commercial entities, we've seen as many as 10 55-gallon drums.
Oh, no kidding.
Wow.
On one delivery. So again, the difference between, so to me, I would say that is something that is required by state law for them to handle completely on their own under a commercial registration, and they're taking it to us for free.
And how Do you see a lot of improperly discarded hazardous waste on town properties, just in sort of your normal course of?
Since
doing
I've
things?
been here, almost 3 years, not one that I can remember.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Val? Yes, it's open. You have to come to the microphone, please, Val.
Are solar panels considered hazardous? There's a huge influx in people using solar panels, and I foresee they're going to eventually have to be replaced, and what's going to happen to those?
That's a great question. I won't say I'm an expert on solar panels, but what I would say is most of these agreements with solar panels are 20 or 25-year terms where they're basically sitting passively in place for that entire term. That said, what happens when they are taken out like any other demo project? Generally, that would be considered construction and demolition debris, and 100% of that is exported. It's all taken off island. So it's not something that would remain here in a landfill.
Thank you. Joe?
Rob, the current 6 times, that's for residential and small commercial users, so are there any large producers of hazardous waste on Nantucket?
So there's 3 categories at the state level. There's large quantity generator, small quantity generator, and very small quantity generators. They all have very specific criteria and thresholds to take a look at, which include, and this is actually up on our website if people are interested in the details. I don't remember them specifically off the top of my head, but it varies from volume of what's considered mildly hazardous and a smaller quantity of something that's considered highly hazardous. And then there's a combination there too. So if you break one or both of those thresholds, it tells you which category you fall into. Again, they're required by state law to not only handle it themselves, but to register with the state, which is another key thing that DPW has taken on this year. When we agreed and actually petitioned the select board to open it to very small quantity generators, it was with an eye towards convenience and protecting the environment. But at the same time, we wanted to get a handle on who's registered. At the time, when we first opened and started to collect commercial, there were 0 registered. So through outreach at each of our events, every commercial vendor that's coming in with materials is handed the application package and the list of the process of how to register their company. So we've had excellent participation. Everyone who's there doing the right thing is turning around and registering with the state, which is great.
And finally, the town does at the DPW at the landfill. We don't in between these sessions. You don't accept or store any, or you're not supposed to anyway, accept or store any. Contractor shows up with 10 gallons of
Correct.
Hatfield oil paint.
We do not.
Can't leave it.
That's correct. We do not collect or store either at the landfill facility or DPW facility. The only thing that is stored on site at DPW is the materials that we are generating ourselves from our own equipment. Again, that's all in mechanics garage and on specifically designed, reservoir pallets and that sort of thing.
Gotcha. Good. Thanks, Rob.
Any other questions for Rob?
I just had one, just on your hazardous waste days, are you mostly getting oil paint? I mean, is that 80% of what you're getting, or?
I would say most of what we collect is waste oil. That's probably the highest, and particularly that's probably very skewed now because a lot of the commercial generators are bringing in waste oil as well. So that's, even though it's a significantly smaller number of participants, the volume is way up. It's mostly landscapers' waste oil.
Interesting.
And a good reminder, waste oil, used oil, is able to be, by law, it's required to be accepted at the point of sale. So if you're buying oil here, you should be able to return it back to where you bought it from. By law, they're supposed to handle it.
Oh,
So you don't really need to put it in that gasification plant that you're going to build in 5 years.
Well, it's possible. Again, we always look at the recycling the whole thing. If it makes sense and it's an efficient way to handle it. Again, it's very costly to run these events and to take this material off. If there's an alternative that is beneficial, we definitely look at that.
Anything else? Good, thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Val, you're up. Please.
I also have handouts. Just,
Sorry, Cliff, you weren't the only one.
no, mine's just an outline
Thank you.
with no figures and facts and thoughts and whatever.
Which one is this, Denise?
I'm getting there. I'm a little slow, as we all know. It is,
I don't know what number
I will
article.
tell you in 1 second. 58.
Okay. Val Oliver, I'm proposing to modify a previously approved increase in overall building height in the Mid-Island Overlay District. I did have a chance to watch the video last night of the prior hearing where the planning staff came and spoke and gave their concerns and were vehemently opposed. So I thank you for the opportunity to let me give my side of how I see it.
Absolutely.
And I prepared a little statement. Our master plan tried to predict our island's future, but time has a way of changing those ideas, and unfortunately, Mr. Mid-Island Reality didn't know he was supposed to follow the plan. The influx of population wanting to live here and work here could not have been predicted. But to encourage car-free housing opportunities is an ill-considered planning concept, I believe. Parking now in this area has reached critical mass. My 84-year-old mother's next-door neighbor on Hooper Farm Road has 11 cars parked around the house, on the lawn, and the street. It's like a wagon train. She's been approached by other neighbors asking, because now she lives alone, can someone rent parking space from her? It's a little disconcerting. Parking reality in Mid-Island is not working, and it's a reality. I don't believe the 40-foot tall, top floor, car-free housing opportunity will be used for employees of new businesses emerging in this area as it's intended to be. I foresee these rooms, apartments with a water view will become nightly high-end rentals on Airbnb. There's no need for more of this guest-type housing and its related issues, which, by the way, are reducing our year-round housing stock at an alarming rate. This height increase will just exacerbate the problem at our expense, and I don't believe any housing will be gained at all. Additionally, and maybe more important to me, is the architectural language of taller buildings that will emerge and become an urban landscape that our tourists are trying to escape from on vacation. The non-local architect who produced the conceptual presentation for Mid-Island development did not understand our desire that we want buildings to fit in and fit within our historic fabric. My fears were illustrated in this concept is exactly what I foresee we will become, a cityfied metropolis, and not remain our Nantucket that we know and love. I grew up in this area, and I still reside here as an adult, so I think that makes me a certified Mid-Island expert. My reason for this article is partially maybe a bit sentimental, but the driving force is really my daily navigation of congestion and gridlock while living and working here in Mid-Island, even in the off-season. So you can try and implement this outdated master plan as it was originally laid out, but you cannot fit 10 pounds of apples in a 5-pound bucket. To not expect a breach when the pail is full feels like indifference and disregard for the existing citizens in this area and our woeful circumstances. The amendment I'm advocating for won't solve these issues, but it can help and avoid increasing them. It strives to leave the height limitation we have always had at 30 feet to continue to drive the character of new structures to fit into our existing neighborhood and not change to an urban architectural anomaly. As stated in the master plan of 2009, this document needs to be fluid and evolving, which was quite astute from the original authors, because real life in Mid-Island is fluid and evolving constantly. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Val. Don't go anywhere. Is there someone else who'd like to speak to this? Okay. Patrick, please.
So, I'm Patrick Ridge, and I just don't support this, and I hope that you won't either. First, the property that she was referencing, where the 11 cars, isn't actually in the CMI district, and it's a district that is between 10 and 12 acres, and I think right now my partner and I own between 8 and 10% of it. We have 5 residential units, none of them are rented for Airbnb, and I think I very well understand the parking constraints on Mid-Island. But how we got to the CMI in the first place, I think, is very important to note. We were RC2 when I started at 1 Chins Way, and the planning staff, specifically Leslie, did a really good job on outreach and trying to kind of clean up zoning from RC2 to the new proposed CMI. It reduced several options away as a property owner that we could no longer do because of the change in zoning. And, after several meetings with my neighbors and with the planning, we really started to understand where they were going with the CMI district. And so when it went to town meeting at 2016, it didn't get called. And it was, approved. And subsequently, I've made 2 purchases in the CMI district since that's been created, both at 2 and 4 Chins Way and 147 Orange Street. And I just feel very, very strongly that that the height restriction, if when development happens, it's important to, if you want to have housing, and especially all of my stuff over there is workforce housing at this point. If you want to have a good housing stock over there, you're going to need a full 3rd floor. And it just seems like, I don't think that a citizen petition on town meeting is a great way to change zoning. And I think there needs to be more discussion on this. And it's not what I bought. And had I known it was going to be a 30-foot height thing, I would have jumped up and down at town meeting in 2016, claiming that I needed to stay in the RC2, and I wouldn't have been supportive of it. So thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Question?
Wait, I have a question about that. Patrick, RC2 has a 30-foot height restriction.
Yep, so RC2, when we were cleaning up the zoning, it's a great question. I was kind of like mid-successful at the time. It was about 2016. I think I just finished up my 2nd or 3rd season. I wasn't 100% sure I was going to keep my location. There was about 15 to 20 other more advantageous, different things that I could have done with my property in RC2 that were being taken away than when we went to CMI. So like, for example, I only had 6 parking spaces in my building and with my first building, and I always thought like, hey, if it doesn't make it as a restaurant, this could be a great spot for a landscaper to do business. They could put 6 trucks, the crew could be upstairs, the bookkeeper and the office people could be on the 1st floor. Well, when we changed to the CMI zoning, it was really to kind of clean up a lot of the zoning changes, and and so kind of there was they were taking away several things that we could do with our property and trying to clean up the whole look of the area, and so we bought into it.
But there was benefits too, like you can have more dwellings per square foot.
Some of the benefits of the CMI were that you could build to 40 feet, and that's why we were supportive of it and have 0 setbacks.
Okay, so that's one change.
Mm-hmm.
But you can have more dwellings per square foot in the CMI than you could in RC2.
Sure. And you could also build to 40 feet.
You also could build to 40 feet.
Yeah.
Okay, I have also a question for Val.
Yeah, of course. And Val has a question for Patrick.
Val, so oh, why don't you go first?
Go ahead, Val.
Yeah, go ahead.
The buildings that you have, Patrick, are 30 feet, which is what our standard has been. There is not a building built to 40 feet yet, so I don't think it's hurting you.
And several other
Those are
ones, and
institutional structures, not residences.
that's what you see today, right? So, I mean,
Right.
at some point, I'll probably change some of the look of my buildings. I've been changing.
You have
the
to
look.
come to HDC.
And that's a great thing of, that's where this would get negotiated between down from 40 feet right now. So, and that's a process that I understand, but I don't think that we should be limiting it to 30.
Okay.
So actually, that's my
That's the
question,
beauty of
Val.
our
I've gotten
country.
some unsolicited phone calls from people with strong opinions on this, and they tell me there's no reason that we need a limit of 30 feet because HTC has absolute discretion, and any design they don't like above 30 feet, they can cap at 30 feet. That's not been my experience with HTC. When people aren't happy with what HTC says about their designs, they typically appeal their decisions. Now, you've been on HTC a long time. If the zoning bylaw allows for buildings up to 40 feet, and you disapprove something because, not maybe because it's above 30 feet, but you don't think that the design is in character with the neighborhood, which would probably be an easy case to make given that nothing's above 30 feet today, do you think that the HTC will be supported in the case of an appeal? Or do you
That's a good question. We never really know if we're going to have much support. We haven't approved anything at 40 feet yet. We've done our darndest to keep it down. I think part of the reason I wanted to propose this was we had a joint meeting with the planning board and that we kind of tossed this idea around of collaborating on ideas. And this was one of the issues that we wanted to sort of take off our plate. Because when people are sold property, they're told you can build up to 40 feet, and then it becomes a battle on our end of things. But the other part of that is, like it or not like it, Mid-Island does have a character. I know this is where all the infill is supposed to take place, and I can appreciate that. But we did our darndest for the last 20 years or so to make our businesses fit in and look like they are part of the character of the neighborhood, not these homages to someone's ego. And, I can appreciate workforce housing. I know that was the intent of the article. Unfortunately, I don't see that being a reality. When you can get up to 40 feet and see water, you're not going to put your employees up there. And with employees, you can have a car-free desire, and that's a beautiful dream and a wish. People come with cars. And I just used the example of the house on Hooper Farm Road where my mom lives, because that's one household with 11 cars. We have to limit cars, we have to do something. So my desire is to take the extra floor off the table and thereby reduce the amount of housing that's needed for each structure. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. John? To Patrick's point about that this shouldn't be something discussed or decided at town meeting, could you please give us an opinion or an observation on that?
So as I think all of you know, whenever there is a warrant article, whether it's by petition or otherwise, proposing an amendment to the zoning bylaw, it has to be referred to the planning board for a public hearing and then a report and recommendation. And I'm assuming this one has been referred and that the planning board will be providing such a recommendation.
They have done so already.
Okay, and that is a very standard process. It is the public hearing process, presumably, where any concerns about the bylaw itself and maybe unintended consequences, that's the forum, if you will, where those things need to be discussed and vetted. So certainly any citizen has the right to petition for a zoning amendment, but there are procedures in place that ensure that those articles are fully vetted in front of the planning board.
Okay,
I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
please stay there. So
Sure.
the planning board motion was to move to take no action.
yep.
So we have a couple new members on our finance committee. Could you please elaborate on the difference between take no action and motion not to adopt?
So, so Denise, I think what you're referring to is there is a provision in the Zoning Act that prohibits what are called repetitive zoning petitions, meaning that if a zoning article goes before town meeting and it is subject to a negative action, then it may not be brought back to a future town meeting for a period of at least 2 years, unless the planning board provides a positive recommendation. Now, in this instance, a motion not to adopt, in my opinion, would be a negative action. So it would trigger that bar for 2 years. We have many debates in our office about how motions are worded and what's considered a negative action.
But this one was take no
And
action.
generally, a motion to pass over isn't really a negative action, or a motion. I'm sorry, it was not.
So their motion is motion not to adopt.
Yeah, so
Or
I
no,
would
I'm
s-
sorry, their motion is motion to take no action. is what
I'm
they
not
said.
sure that's a negative action. A motion not to adopt would be, in my opinion, a negative action.
Correct.
And would trigger the 2-year bar.
In respect of planning, but in general, I meant also here, when we make rulings of motion not to adopt, and we make rulings of motion of take no action,
For your purposes, I don't see a difference,
okay,
other than in the zoning context.
okay. Now, my understanding of this particular article, it does not fall under the 2-year, or it did, we got the letter from Leslie.
What do you mean?
So what John just described, when there's been a negative motion, you can't
Oh.
bring it forward again for 2 years.
This wasn't the one that was
This
highlighted for
wasn't
that
the one.
concern,
Okay, thank you.
in my recollection.
Yeah, no, I read it this afternoon and would need to
Right.
reread it to
think
remind
that
I think this
myself.
is one of Attorney Cohen's.
Cohen's, yeah.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Right, and this, I believe the height limitation was changed last year, if I'm not mistaken.
2016.
But that
16, yeah.
doesn't trigger that, obviously, because it wasn't a negative action.
Okay, all right, thank you. Further questions?
Just curious, Val, do you know, are there any of the 40-foot
Thank you,
ones
John.
on the books currently, or in the process of seeking approvals at this point?
We had quite a few about a year and a half
I
ago.
know there was one, the apartment building down
corner of
by
Dave.
Island Home, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then some condos across from Marine Lumber. I think it was the Ryder property, formerly the Ryder property. But neither of those got even close to 40 feet. And we did approve structures there, and nothing's been built, so I don't know what's going on with that, but
Okay, thanks.
yeah. It really just comes down to people equal parking, and there's not enough of it.
So, Val, maybe you can answer this, or somebody else in the room. If you can get 3 floors in 30 feet, does that mean you can get 4 floors in 40 feet?
I think that's the presumption, probably, for the height increase.
Because what I keep hearing from proponents of the status quo, the 40 feet, is this is about getting 3 full stories.
You can also go down.
Right.
You know, you can make garden basement apartments,
Yeah.
not like,
But-
you're
but-
locking someone
but I'm
down there
talking
like a
about
slave.
Above ground, I keep hearing this is about 3 full stories
Yeah.
and headroom on the 3rd floor, and that's what you need to make a livable space. Notwithstanding that all of Nantucket and Bayberry Commons are not that, and they have apartments
And they have
on the 3rd
dormers
floor.
to make up the space, yeah.
Right, but, if the argument is you want 3 full floors, I guess that just doesn't ring true to me. If you can get a 4th floor in 40 feet, then is this really about 3rd floors, or is this about what you're talking about, which is the urbanization of a landscape?
And I hate to be a naysayer, but I just see a lot of good intentioned things get taken and skewed in a different direction. for profit, and I just hate to see that happen. And in the meantime, we're ruining or increasing a lot of problems that aren't resolved yet here in this area.
Okay, thank you. The person in the back would like to say something? Yes. I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
My name is Nan Sperry, and I'm just reading the first thing, which is building height increase, question mark, to encourage housing, type non-specific. Would there be a consideration to have a building height increase for specifically affordable housing? And then increase the percentage that we need to avoid, although we've got a 2-year hiatus, additional 40B projects. Since it says not, I just read this, it says non-specific, make it maybe specific affordable if that's more, reasonable.
Thank you for that comment. Val?
Well, can I just weigh in on that? I mean, I think a zone is supposed to be a zone, and to just single out a property within a zone it's harder to do that than it sounds.
Right, I think you're talking about probably a complex, just for housing, which is one thing. I'm talking about individual properties getting sold, and we have no regulation over how it's used at all. Right. Even though, the best of intentions, like I said, I feel we have a lot of things in place that go non-regulated, even though there are all kinds of rules about them, so.
Thank you.
Thanks, Val.
Any further questions for any of the people who've spoken so far? No? Thank you, Val. And thank you, Nan. And thank you, Patrick.
I just want to make the comment that before we take any action on that, I want to bring copies of the enabling legislation for the HTC for this committee to read, because I think this gets at the heart of what the HTC was, which more than historic preservation was about the preservation of the aesthetic character of the island, what people come to think of as Nantucket.
Yeah.
And I think this strikes at the heart of that. And once you change the character of an area, a precedent's been set. If this gets rolled back after the first set of 40-foot buildings goes in, I don't think we go back from that. So, anyway.
I'm sorry, I'm just not clear on your point, being that you think it needs a zoning change back, or you think the HTC is the protecting
The HTC
agency here and doesn't need the zoning change?
The HTC needs the zoning change back to 30 feet if
So
it's
they don't
going to
lose an
be able
appeal.
to, correct, if it's going to be able to do what its mission was, which was to protect the integrity of the aesthetics of neighborhoods.
Thank you for the clarification.
And Val, one last thought. Was there ever a idea that 35 feet would be okay? Because I remember, and I realize I'm splitting the difference here, but I remember at a town meeting several years ago where someone was suggesting that 30 to 35 was necessary to make a building not look like a dormitory, not look like a block, that it would make it, that extra 5 feet would give them some design elements that they wouldn't have been able to get at 30 feet.
I can't answer that because I don't really know or have the language of what the shift up was,
Okay.
except that there was some conversation the other day here when you were talking with Andrew and Leslie about the idea was to entice or encourage car-free housing. And so I don't know. I don't know who proposed it in the first place.
No,
Yeah.
well, this was a while ago, but I just
Yeah.
remember they were quite adamant they didn't want 40 feet, but they said, you know what, 30 is the current limit. If I had an extra 5 feet, the building would look so much better, and it would fit into the
but that's-
neighborhood so much better.
But that's about their ceiling height on the inside, I'm assuming. That's not about aesthetically, that isn't in line with what's built here.
No, I'm just saying that was their
Yeah,
reasoning
but
at the
I
time.
do remember that argument.
That was,
And I guess while
They wanted
Val's
dormers.
up again, yeah,
right, they wanted dormers,
or fewer
basically.
dormers,
yeah,
fewer. Yeah.
fewer.
Do you have any sense of, I don't imagine HTC as a body has taken a position on this, but are there other sitting commissioners who support your
I
effort
think we
here?
all agree that we'd like to see it stay the way it is, status quo.
Well, status
But we
quo is
weren't
40
able
feet.
as a group to get together and put something forward as an article from us as an entity, so I had to act quickly. And I also live in this area, so it's important to me personally.
Right. But you mean not status quo, you mean go back to 30 feet.
So, I'm sorry, say that again?
You said that you think everybody wants the status quo, but you mean go back
30,
to 30
what
feet.
we have is existing.
The
What
status
you
quo
had.
is stock, not the regulation.
Right, okay. Pre-2016 town meeting.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah.
Thank you, Val. Patrick and Nan, thank you very much.
Well, can I ask one more question? Maybe you know the answer. Does this mean the fire station would be out of
Municipal buildings are
exempt?
exempt.
Okay.
Okay. Mr. Iverson, number 77, everyone. Those of you following home.
77.
77.
77. I successfully steered clear of that one. I mean, you guys probably know what this article's about. It's about, me hearing from a lot of other retailers in town that have had issues with those couple of locations in town where the people basically stand in the door and try to lure you in with free samples and so on and so forth. And that it's negatively affected the businesses in surrounding, especially on Center Street. So I'm not really sure what I could do about it. Talked to Attorney Giorgio and he suggested some changes to the bylaw that we have currently, which is basically my article for town meeting.
Okay. Now, John, I believe there are some First Amendment issues here. And then I'll open it up, of course, to questions from FinCom. I just wanted to hear John's.
So we did raise that issue in our comments, but I think this is going to be more of an as-applied analysis.
Okay.
So oftentimes a bylaw might be perfectly innocuous on its face, but oftentimes the Attorney General will issue a caution that you have to be careful how to apply this bylaw so it doesn't infringe on anybody's First Amendment rights. Mm-hmm. And I did indicate in my comments the four-part test that courts generally look at when they analyze these kinds of issues. I do think if this was strictly simply a prohibition that's content neutral, which this appears to be, I suspect that you wouldn't have an issue enforcing it, but it's certainly a possibility that the Attorney General might issue a caution on the bylaw, which they often do. So I wouldn't be too concerned with that as a basis for not approving this or not recommending this article. I think the Finance Committee would be wise to just focus on the substance of it, and if it does pass town meeting, we'll see what the Attorney General has to say about it.
Okay, thank you. Questions?
It seems like a great idea. I mean, back to keeping the integrity
character
of
of
what
the
people
island.
come to Nantucket for.
Get that mall mentality off of Main Street and the core district if we can.
Well, right, and it makes us look like we're protecting,
yeah, and
the
I
island.
understand the freedom of speech issues here. Other towns in the state have gone the licensing direction, which again is going to create more work for town employees. So I think this is a good place to start and see where we get from here, and then maybe we'll end up going the licensing direction, but I don't know.
Thank you.
Would this include, you think, like bikes in front of Young's Bike Shop? My experience with this type of thing in the past, I've seen these come around outside display of merchandise 25 years ago, and we were in some of those businesses that we were unintended consequences, and it failed because of that reason, that everybody, all of a sudden the whole room got up and said, well, what about this and what about that? And there were sort of all these broad unintended things that everyone sort of, the intent of the petitioner, everyone was agreeing with, but it covered a whole bunch of other stuff that actually are part of the character of Nantucket. I remember at the time it would have outlawed the whirly gigs.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if you've gotten any of that kind of feedback, or if, and the Young's example just jumped to mind, but I can
Do the Youngs have a special permit? Because they're
I-
not just on their property, right?
well, that's what this is about. It's about being on town side.
No, I know, but do
Well,
they have a
so-
special permit to do what they're doing?
No, I think their signs grandfather is my understanding. With the bike shops,
Just
I've
for the record,
talked-
I'm not asking that
No,
question.
no, no,
because I
no.
think
Like,
that should be
listen,
challenged to
Young's is my landlord, so I don't want to screw with them, or I'll be out of business. But
I wasn't trying to call
I think
attention
that
to anything.
what we're doing is targeting the free sample, because we can't really target any salesperson from trying to sell you something. So this article is more targeted towards those people handing out moisturizers or whatever on their silver plate, where that wouldn't really be a Young's or Nantucket Bike Shop thing. Yes, they're vocal, they're salesmen, they got a gig going on down there. This is not directed towards them in any sense, and I don't think that they'd be swooped up in an unintended consequence issue.
That's the part
here.
I'm asking about.
Yeah,
have
no, I
have
get-
no
I
issue
get
with your
that.
intent. I'm with my colleague on that. That sounds great.
Yeah.
But that's just kind of what I'm trying to.
No, 100% get that. I mean, I definitely don't want to affect anyone down there on that street.
Yes, please, Libby.
I was just going to say the Young's issue, or rather, not to name a name, the bikes on the street display issue is completely separate from this, and there actually is an existing bylaw that addresses that.
Okay, thank you.
What about tomatoes from Bartlett's Trucks, as long as you're asking?
We're getting into lots of stuff that's not part of his
Exactly, just
bylaw, but locally grown fruits, vegetables, and locally caught fish are exempt.
Okay, thank you. Oh, great. Just making sure that we're,
Okay.
Guys, we're full of good answers today.
I mean,
Fish
I would be as upset as any business like that if they were affected by this. So
so it's really the free samples, that's the issue.
that's the issue.
okay.
I mean, that's the most targeted way to try to deal with it. And I'm not sure it'll be successful, but I think we need to try to do it in a way that doesn't create some onerous process for business owners or for the town to manage.
I think that language.
I think it's-
Can I just
Yeah.
play devil's advocate?
Yeah.
I have not witnessed this, I have not experienced this in town, in town during the summer. Is it really such a bad thing that we need to amend the bylaw? I mean,
So,
it just seems like we're
I'm-
using a hammer to.
Well, there's a couple things. One, and I don't think that I can really speak to it, but questionable business practices, we'll say, and I'll leave it at that with these guys. Second of all, my employee's mother owns a shop right next to the one on Center Street. People literally walk across the street and around to get away from these people
Yeah.
and continue down the street. So they bypass her whole front door because of it. So listen, do what you want, but you shouldn't be able to affect businesses that surround you or people's personal space walking down the street, is my feeling.
They are pretty enthusiastic, Joe, in terms of giving you, especially if, you look like I do, and they're like, oh, you need this, and you need this, and you need this. I get a lot of offers as I go down the street.
Well, also
Just
they
saying.
move locations every year, so you don't know who.
Well,
they're
I think they moved. They were down on the wharf, I think, down by the High Line for a couple years.
Yeah.
And then they moved up. I guess this year they moved up to the old Tompkins building, and then they're in one of Jay Pepper's buildings on Center Street, just past
Those two. Mhm.
Condon and Coleman.
Yeah.
Do I hear an appetite for a motion on this one?
Yeah, motion to adopt.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Cliff, I think you're back up. This way we got to keep Cliff a little longer. And Cliff's is number 30-something, 36, I think it is.
My beach.
Your beach one. Yep, what number? I'm getting there.
36.
Out of respect to Joe and
36, look at that.
the rest of the committee, I don't have a number there, and I think I discussed it with council back in, you gotta do these things in October, or wherever it was. So hopefully if this works, council can aid us in how much money we might need I don't know. That's not my forte, but. Are you asking? Yes. I think we talked about that when we were doing the article. But anyway.
Brian's here.
As a result, unfortunately, of not being able to walk down the beach out at Fisher's Landing or that area most of the summer because an individual had the beach roped off, I thought we had vetted this enough, this who owns the beach and what you're allowed to do on the beach is long ago, but apparently we haven't. The individual testified that the police told him to put the ropes out, so not to point any fingers, but if they're confused, I think everybody needs to get on the same page, and Matt Fees put forth articles about the Nantucket ditch, articles from 70, where, you know, obviously we're a little different than the rest of Massachusetts because we were part of New York, and the freshwater ponds and the ditches and legislation that was passed to give free access to all these different areas. And like I said, when we had started the One Big Beach program, I thought we had gotten a hold of all this information and everybody was on board with what we could do and couldn't do, and apparently we're not. So I was hoping to raise or appropriate, maybe under the guidance of council, on how much money we might need to get somewhere to get a positive, I think that's how we worded it, a positive recommendation on beach access. And that way you wouldn't take an entire summer to tell some individual that he's breaking the law, putting ropes across the beach.
Okay. Questions for Cliff?
I think mine is just for town council. Is there any ambiguity on this?
And I believe it's been ruled on before, or?
So we have issued two opinions on this, but I want to emphasize that in both of those opinions, we were dealing with very specific facts related to a specific parcel of land. And what we said was those opinions were based upon the wording of the deeds for the deed for that particular property. And nobody should think that that same opinion would apply to any lot anywhere on the island, because you just can't come to those kinds of conclusions. Based upon the specific deed references in that circumstance, we gave the opinion that there was ownership to the basically to the low water mark, subject to the rights of fishing, fouling, and navigation. Now, it is possible there are other waterfront parcels where we wouldn't come to that same conclusion. So if you're looking to have a definitive answer that you could apply island-wide, well, that's not possible unless you examined every deed and every specific circumstance. And I think that would be a very costly title search, basically, that you would have to do. If you're looking for an answer that is different than the answer we provided, well, you know, I'm going to be very honest here. You could spend a tremendous amount of money on a legal opinion, and being a lawyer myself, I know how other lawyers think. You know, they want to get the business, and so they're going to come up with some kind of an opinion, and you know, you could rely upon that and get sued, and you know, what's the point, I guess, is the question. I mean, I think you need to apply the law on a very specific set of facts, and until those situations actually arise and we can analyze it, I don't understand the point of spending a lot of money, and believe me, it could be a lot of money. Seeing some of the rates that lawyers charge it could potentially be a very expensive proposition, and I think fairly unfocused, without a specific set of facts in front of you.
questions for John on that clarity?
That was very clear to me.
Say one more thing?
Sure.
And you're going to have to put a number on this appropriation. And whatever number you put on that appropriation, you will spend, because that's the way it works.
Thank you, John. Cliff, any reaction to what you've just heard?
Justice is green. And obviously, if you can find this much flaw in a deed or anything, you can open up a can of worms. So I guess it's the opinion of town meeting whether or not they want to fight this battle. And my point was from the beginning is, how do you allow someone to rope off a beach for an entire summer? I thought we'd beyond that point, but I guess we're not. And the fact, like I said, go back to, and won't get too deep, but if you read the reason to give fee in the land to the low tide mark, it was for Boston Harbor and for people to be allowed to build and encourage people to build businesses and piers and docks. So what's that got to do with us? We're not Boston Harbor. We're not building piers and docks in Diona's Beach or anyplace else. So Wayne Holmes got up probably 30 years ago at town meeting and talked about this, and this is a battle for our beaches. And I thought we'd come much farther than we have, but after last summer, I think, I don't know, we've lost our way. So there has to be some clarity. I realize there's some deeds that specifically say one thing, but I'm looking for a general overall beach access answer.
And I just heard from John that is not possible unless you go deed by deed.
No,
So-
that's not what I'm talking about. You don't have to go deed. I don't believe we have to.
Okay. Any other questions for Cliff on this, or John? No? Okay, thank you. Thanks, Cliff. Always a pleasure to see you. He knows. Always a pleasure to be seen. Thank you, Cliff. All right, I think I lost Mr. Lowell. He had 2 more to go, but he seems to have. So we had hazardous waste, which we talked about. We also had today, Val, we talked about. Mr. Lowell, affordable housing requirements and public property damage. And he's gone. Okay. We had Mr. Iverson, which we talked about, and Mr. DaCosta is not here. Okay. So, John, while we have you at least, if you could speak to the ones, Mr. Lowell's affordable housing requirements and the public property damage, at least give us
Should I
a.
go just stick my head out the door and see if he might be in the lobby? or
Oh, yeah,
something?
would you, thank you, Chris, because,
Skedaddle?
and you didn't stop him, Brooke? Okay, let's wait till Chris comes back. Okay.
So,
Yeah, I wanted to hear.
Okay.
So Andrew had asked us to look at several of the petitioned articles as they relate to zoning.
Okay.
And I apologize for this, but we sent Andrew an opinion on Monday.
Yes.
And I don't think it was copied to the Finance Committee, but I will get you a copy
Leslie
of that.
sent us.
Sorry?
Leslie sent us a letter today.
Oh,
from,
good.
From Julia at KP Law.
Judith Cutler.
Judith. And I forwarded it to everyone
Perfect.
this afternoon.
Good.
So we did get it.
Good.
This
Thank you.
afternoon. Via Leslie.
So on the affordable housing article, as I said in my comments, it's not a bylaw. It's really a directive to the town to look at a regulation. That's the way I interpret it. That would require for every 10th house that's constructed, or every 10th unit that's constructed, every 9 units, the 10th one would be affordable. And what Judith's letter says, opinion, and of course I totally agree with this, is this would apply to the construction of any residential unit, including one that was allowed by right. And we don't think that that kind of a bylaw, presuming at some point it's proposed as a bylaw, would pass legal muster. And could potentially expose the town to, I think, some significant liability, because it, in essence, if it's unlike an inclusionary zoning bylaw where by special permit you can get some additional density, for example, in exchange for committing to constructing a certain number of affordable housing units. It doesn't affect the underlying ability that you have to develop your own property, whereas this one does.
Okay.
And so we think, we doubt it would be approved by the Attorney General, but even if it were, it could subject the town to some liability.
Okay,
Okay?
thank you. And then the public property damage, which is within 500 feet. So if I've
I'm sorry,
done-
what article is that?
It's article number 64.
60?
4.
I just want to refresh my recollection, as they say in court.
Please do. And the issue,
Sure,
we
yeah.
discussed
So,
it with
I
the
mean,
planning folks as well.
I think I also said on this one, it's a non-binding vote. It would direct the Plus Department to enact some regulations and to deal with what happens if public property is damaged pursuant to the construction of building based on a building permit. This, I don't see any particular issues with this one. It's non-binding. It doesn't require the Plus or the town to take any particular action, but it certainly is something that town meeting could vote without too much agita from me.
Okay. Yes, please.
I have not had a chance to talk to Andy Lowell about this, but as you know, from our budget presentation to you, we have a expense increase request in DPW for a construction supervisor. And part of the duties of that position would be to try to develop or work towards developing a more robust process for just what he's trying to get at, I think, here. There are too many times when contractors cut into bike paths, roads, park all over them when their developments are under construction. And the planning board already does have some measures in place to address that when there's a subdivision or a particular type of development that is permitted through them. Some of these things are not permitted through them. You don't need a special permit to build your residential house. However, sometimes things happen next to your residential house that impacts the bike path or the sidewalk or the road. So I think that's what he's trying to get at, and we are hoping that this construction supervisor position, which we've been talking about for several years now, can help with this. So just FYI.
Thank you.
I don't know that we need that type of regulation there. We already have road opening regulations in place that do have some penalties for this kind of thing. The problem is we don't have the resources to very actively enforce it. So those regulations could potentially be tweaked a bit to get more at this, but I think we already have the base mechanism in place.
When we discussed it with Andrew and Leslie on Tuesday, Andrew's one comment that kind of stuck with me because I wrote it down. He said he said, can we prove that the damage that's 500 feet away was caused by this particular site? He said 500 feet is a long way from, and that was one of the issues that he had with it, but they're not going to rule on it until after February 10th when they have their next public hearing. So they have not made as of Tuesday, they have not made a motion on
Well,
this
they
one.
also don't need to make a motion on it because it's not a zoning article.
Oh, okay. Fair enough. Good. So, we'll go back to my famous list here.
I'd be happy to make a motion on 63 if we're there on the affordable housing piece that we just covered. That seemed like it was ready for a motion and not adopt.
Okay.
Are you doing that? I'd like to second that.
Okay.
If that's appropriate at this time from the chair.
Yes, so back to 63. There's a motion on the table, a motion not to adopt. A second from Stephen. Any further discussion on that? Ready for a vote? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It carries unanimously. Okay. Thank you, Chris. We got 2 done tonight.
You think we can deal with 64 right now also?
Sure. What was the,
The one we just covered, the property damage one.
yeah?
Yeah. I guess maybe just for some discussion beforehand, I like the idea, but I agree that 500 feet is too much. So whereas planning board's not going to take it up, maybe we can take some action here.
Okay.
So I would, let's see, what would our motion be? I don't want to read the whole thing, but what would people think is a more reasonable distance? Like 100 feet from a property? 100 feet's pretty far.
I mean, 50.
50 feet from each from each side.
Don't you think? I mean, if what we're trying to deal with is, in effect, people parking trucks on the bike path or cutting the roadway and not repairing it the way we want it to be done. I mean, it seems to me it's only going to happen within a pretty close distance of the perimeter of the building lot.
I have to say that I don't think that's always true. I mean, if you have, say you have a plumber, an electrician, and 4 carpenters on the crew, and then the company truck, you might have 10 vehicles, which cannot get into the property. It's not that I'm in favor of being like too widely focused here, but there's, on a lot of these sites, that's pretty much common on a daily basis. So I can see why I see damage from that as I'm in the field. So
I'm just reading this a little bit more closely, and I think the only place that the distance comes into play is the requirement to submit photos. So taking photos 500 feet down the road doesn't seem like all that big a deal.
I know, but why do you want them to do that? What's that going to prove? They could have taken the photo a month before and turned it in.
I suppose it's not specific enough, but I would have guessed that the photos are submitted before they pick up the permit, and then they're reviewed before the certificate of occupancy is issued.
But we know the building inspector has been there multiple times to give them the CO, so I don't understand why he doesn't have, he or
Right.
she, excuse
Right, but
me, doesn't have eyes and ears
But
to.
he wouldn't have the photos from beforehand. The building
So-
department, as a rule, doesn't go take photos of a site before.
It does say photos of 500 feet, but it's these areas shall be inspected and approved. So it's to make the boundary 500 feet, basically.
I see, so the inspections, that's
Yeah,
too
so
far.
the second sentence makes why the 500 photos are necessary,
I see.
would
We
be
could
my
ask to make them-
interpretation of this.
we could ask to make them dated photographs, which pretty
mean,
much on any phone camera is going to do
I'm
that
just
for you.
totally opposed to this.
Yeah, I mean, even though this sounds like sort of a good idea, isn't this another case of all due respect to the citizenry coming in and trying to have town meeting sort of create rules and regulations that the building department or the police department or whatever should, and may have good reasons why they haven't done it this way. Maybe they don't have we don't have this particular person.
But
I'm sorry. We have the base already
Right.
with the road opening regulations. We should expand it to cover this stuff. I don't know if you have to have a number of feet, but I mean, we could get something from another town or whatever. I don't think you have to identify feet and photos and that kind of thing here. There's a basic premise here.
What would happen today if some contractor sort of wrecked a bike path in front of it? Does the town go after him for damages? I mean,
It depends on how wrecked it is, and it depends on what type of project it is. If it's a subdivision that has a special permit through the planning board, then we would go after them because they most likely have an escrow set aside to repair stuff like that. In fact, I could probably name 5 of those right now. If it's just a residential house where, like George was saying, I'm just going to give a little bit of a personal example. Monomoy Road has many houses that have been under construction there. They park all over the road. They have gigantic driveways that they could park in, but they don't. They park on the road because it's a lot easier. Some places are much smaller, so they don't have as much room to jam all their construction vehicles in, so they park on the road. Maybe there's some kind of a permit requirement for that. Maybe they have to pay a permit to do that so that we could put the funds into a revolving fund that we could eventually go back and fix whatever damage there was, because there's lots of different types of damage that we're talking about. There's road, there's sidewalk, there's bike path, there's maybe damage to the right-of-way area. They might have wrecked up the grass next to the bike path. If we're getting hung up on this right now, this is going to take an hour at town meeting or more. So maybe something along the lines of, there may already be a mechanism in place for this. We recommend that the town make it more robust and have a better way to handle this kind of thing, because it's annoying.
Can we require escrow for any general contractor on a job?
What?
It's only gonna be town roads. I mean, it's not gonna, right? This is only
Yeah, this
gonna
is
be on
public
town-
property.
Town property is in front of every single property on the highway. I mean, a lot of them.
Yeah.
Unless you're on a private road. Yeah.
Which is a lot, but
It's
still,
a lot.
still, it's too much. No, we're not gonna require escrow of everybody. You'd need a whole accounting person to deal with that.
Okay.
How about if we go in the direction of take no action and
With
write
Libby's
a comment that
comment.
says we encourage the town to pursue all regulatory avenues to.
Can we make mention of that construction supervisor person? Yeah, let's do that. Yeah.
Could I have a motion, please?
Let's do that, doesn't count.
Sure it does, but I'm a stickler for voting, so,
A motion to take no action.
thank you.
Comment?
Is there a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Yes.
So you want take no action with a comment?
Make it part of the motion.
All right, I volunteer to write the comment. And
Thank you, Joe,
I'll
with Libby.
surreptitiously
Okay.
let Libby, actually, I just said it in
Perfect.
public, it's not gonna be surreptitious.
Not so
I'll
sneaky.
share it with
yeah.
Libby.
Okay, to write the comment. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes unanimously.
Could I please ask, what was the article before this? that you-
63,
What-
it
what'd you
was
vote on
the 10% affordable housing.
What was your
Not
motion?
to adopt.
Motion
Not to adopt? Okay, thank you.
And the logic, which I will share with the sponsor, Mr. Lowell, is that it's legally not enforceable.
Yes.
Yeah,
And practically hard to wrap your head around.
Yeah, and just rude,
among other things, but the
a little bit rude.
subject, thank you,
It's much better.
subject to
Oh,
legal.
no, I love talking anyway.
Would not likely survive.
Okay, thank you, John. Okay. Perfect. Saves me hours of figuring out how to write that. Good.
Alright,
Okay,
we got through the whole list except for 81.
except for,
Not the cost of.
let me go back to,
Washington Street parking lot.
oh yes, Mr.
come Bobby's not
DeCosta. He
coming?
said he was coming, but obviously,
Got a better
Do we
offer.
wanna take a vote on hazardous waste, or do we wanna, is that one?
no, here's the ones that we had for today, and we can go, now you can tell me if you want to vote on them. We have 35 with Cliff, incineration of, gasification of solid waste. We have legal opinion for beach access. We have hazardous waste appropriation for hazardous waste building. Any appetite to make motions and vote on these three tonight, or one by one? First one, gasification.
And I'll make a comment on it. I think I like seeing people come up with ideas. I think the notion of us aggressively investing in technology against some of the tougher island issues like solid waste are a neat idea. So I applaud Cliff for bringing it up, and I hope he can find the right channels to continue the enthusiasm as we work through the solid waste issue in the next 5 years. I have no idea what to do with it as a article.
Okay,
I don't want to buy it because I don't think we can use it. So I think Cliff said, we could appropriate it and then we could decide to spend the money later. I would rather not appropriate the money and encourage that we have the discussion anyway.
yes, yes, please.
It's not, and I'll let Brian speak to this, but it's not as simple as appropriating the money to spend it later, because an amount of this magnitude would most likely require authorization to borrow, subject to a debt exclusion, And of course, once that borrowing is on your books, it's going to affect your bond rating. So I would not recommend that you undertake an appropriation for a major capital project like this unless you're really going to do it. That would be my recommendation. I would also note, Brian and I discussed this earlier, the article says raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds. It doesn't say borrow. Bond counsel might approve it, but that is an issue. And then lastly, one of the things that I certainly would encourage the Finance Committee to think about is, do you want to just spend this money and build this facility yourself, or do you want to enter into a contract with a vendor to design, build, and operate it over a term of years, and so that you wouldn't have that upfront cost yourself? It would essentially be financed by a private vendor, and that's essentially what you have at the landfill now.
I think that's one of a myriad of questions. That's sort of what I meant when I said I don't know what to do with this as an article. Yeah.
Right. And the other point I would make is you have a contractual commitment to deliver 22, whatever it is, 1,000 tons a year to Waste Options of Nantucket. And you can't just build this and then, I guess you could, and then, ship it elsewhere or send it to a gasification plant, but you got to meet your contractual commitments. So this is a concept which I think has a lot of merit, but in my opinion, it needs to be part of a long-term plan for how you're going to operate that landfill after 2025.
Thank you.
In addition to all of that, the FinCom and other boards have previously said, did it go through the proper process? This has not gone through the proper process. Capcom, reviews. Cliff is quite correct that the compost facility that we have now and even the MRF went through a lot of study because they're expensive. They're complicated to operate. This mentions nothing about how it would be operated. Do we need more personnel? This is not permittable in Massachusetts right now. You'd have to go through a very significant permitting process. There'd be all kinds of environmental studies that would have to be done. I don't think it's a buy it off the shelf kind of a thing, but regardless of all of that, it hasn't gone through the town's review process.
Do I hear a motion?
Motion not to adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
I would like to put a comment with it to reflect what Chris said, that, thank you for creative. Chris, in fact, I'm going to ask you to write the comment.
Sure.
Thank you. To recognize that we should be looking
For more innovation in our next bidding process with.
Yes, which the town would in any case, but we would like to recognize our citizens for.
It's good. I
doing
think it's
that.
great.
Okay? All right. Okay. Legal opinion for beach access.
I've said this on a few different articles. I don't know what the problem is that we're trying to solve, and maybe I just work too much in the summer and I don't get enough to the beaches where this is an issue. But I wasn't blocked from going to any beach that I want to go to, and I'm literally not aware of any example, except the one we've been talking about ad nauseum the last couple of weeks, where this is a problem. Cliff is still here. We could ask him to explain to us where this is an issue. I should have asked before, but I'm not aware of where and why this is a problem.
Well, I think.
Yeah, Cliff, you're welcome to come up to the microphone.
Well, it's several issues. It's to bring up and try to clarify, like I talked about, the Nantucket ditch legislation, if you want to call it, from back in 1870, and clarify just where we do stand. I think that's where the majority of the money would be spent, to look back at that appropriation or the bill that was passed in Massachusetts and clarify just what it means. I mean, you talk about, again, the owner and fee of this beach, but under the New York laws, we were given those accesses, and you can't give them away just because you moved to Massachusetts. Just like the ponds still are not owned by the state of Massachusetts.
But I do.
So that's what I wanted to focus on. You know,
Yeah.
I wasn't going to go to every deed and fight with every person up and down the beach. I wanted to look back in history, as Matt Fee has pointed out, to try and make more clarity of where we stand when it comes to this law of ownership and fee. Like I said again,
Well, what
the
do you mean
intent
by
of it
where-
was to
what do you
build
mean by
docks
where
and
we
piers.
stand? I mean, where the towns stand? I mean, you know, there are.
Well, it's not
people have
clear. I thought
people have property rights. There is,
Absolutely.
you know,
And I have property rights, and I was denied those rights.
well, that's not, that, I fully understand that, but that's not the subject at hand here. This is the article that you proposed, Cliff, and, you know, I'm sort of with Stephen. I'm not sure.
Then I think you're
there's a huge
confused on the
problem.
article. That's why I'm trying to clarify it. It's to look into, and I think it's written out. We don't have it in my hand.
To see if a town will vote to raise and appropriate or transfer from available funds a sum of money to provide funding for a legal opinion that would give a direction to allow free access to the tidal flats in and around coastal areas of Nantucket. By investigating in depth the rights given to the town of Nantucket by the proprietors in 1841 as set forth by the Colonial Act of 1693, but not limited to any other means that would benefit the community or take any other action relative thereto.
There you go.
That's what the
But
article says.
Cliff, I just want to point out what, and we've said this about the other article that Spruce put forward. I feel like, just me personally, feels like the law's working. You all complained. He was summoned to the select board, and he took it down. And it was an ugly process. It wasn't nice. I'm sure it wasn't nice for him. It wasn't nice for anybody who was involved, maybe. But I feel like it worked, and he did take it down. Is he operating in a way that you would want him to operate? I mean, no, he's probably not. But
Right. And that's not.
that's
what I'm
my only thing.
That's not what I'm focused on. I'm just trying to say that was another example of why wouldn't somebody know that immediately? Why was it allowed to go on for 6 months or whatever it was? It was just crazy. So that if you don't understand these laws that were written for us back in 1870, or you can mention the date again. I mean,
Yeah, but at the same-
we need to clarify them because
I'm
those
not sure
privileges
it's
were
my
given to me.
misunderstanding of the law. I think that the opinions are clear. We have 2 opinions that we've paid for, and we understand what those laws are. And I think that you are looking for a different legal opinion, which town council just told us he can't provide.
Right.
Somebody
so we
else
need to
would
pay
have to
somebody
do
to
it.
go in depth into those laws.
Right, so
and
so
those
what you're saying
provisions.
is, we don't like the opinion that we've paid for and received. Let's go hire somebody else to get an opinion that our town council won't stand behind us if challenged.
I don't think he knows in depth enough of it. Has he researched those laws?
I assume so, because his firm, I don't, was it you personally? No, it was your firm that
Could I see the
researched and-
findings of that? The in-depth findings? No,
think they were
haven't
on the
seen
select board
in-depth
meeting that
findings of
night
the
when he was here,
Nantucket
yeah.
ditch. Okay, wow, fantastic.
So we wrote the first opinion, and that was researched very carefully by attorney Vicky Marsh, who is one of our most senior real estate attorneys. And as a matter of fact, Vicky does almost all of your real estate work here on the island. She's very knowledgeable. She's very experienced. We subsequently had an attorney who used to work for us for many years, but then went and became a land court judge and spent 10 years on the land court, including as the Chief Justice. That's Judith Cutler. I asked Judith, because I knew how controversial this was, I asked Judith to look at everything, look at Vicky's opinion, look at all the arguments about New York State and the proprietors' rights. It's all addressed in her opinion, and she essentially came to the same conclusion that Attorney Marsh did. So I think those are pretty good, solid opinions. You know, it's not often you get an opinion from the former chief judge of the land court. Now, those, as I said earlier, you still have to look at specific fact situations and specific deeds to see how you would apply that legal opinion. Now, yes, you can go out and you can hire someone else, and I bet you can hire an attorney who's going to give a different opinion. But that's up to you.
Thank you, John. I'm looking like a meerkat for a motion.
Motion not to adopt.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Okay. One opposition.
We couldn't have more discussion on that?
Yeah, why didn't you tell us?
I'm sympathetic to the town is underinvested and taking an aggressive stance on the protection of our rights to the waterfront, but I don't think I was gonna win on that one, but on principle, I vote nay.
Okay, but underinvested, and we just heard that we have two opinions from, I don't know how we can have people more expert.
Are you pissed off that it's not unanimous?
No, I'm pissed off that you don't want to have the discussion. Because I think that's what we're here to do, is have the discussion. I think that's what people rely on us to do.
I concede that you are invested in your points, and that I'm in the minority, and I vote nay.
I wish you had some investment in yours, and you would share them.
Any interest in reopening the vote on that so we can have a further discussion, or we're
I have
going
nothing
to?
more to add.
Okay, thank you. All right, we still have a few more minutes. Hazardous waste. Should we rule on that tonight? The hazardous waste building?
Make a motion not to adopt.
Second.
Any further discussion on it before?
Do you
we
want to talk
vote?
about it?
Do I?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay.
Any further discussion? I should have asked that the last time, my bad.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Say what you like, my little spreadsheet's pretty handy.
It's great.
Okay. Val Oliver?
I think Stephen was gonna bring us some additional.
Correct, on the
homework on that
HTC.
one.
We're waiting on HTC stuff. Okay, let me write
John
that
might
down.
have something to say on that. Denise?
Yes,
No, I had something to say about that.
okay. Affordable housing requirements, you've already spoken on that one.
It's on the Washington Street.
Yes, parking, yes, when Mr. DeCosta didn't come in. Please, we'll jump to that one, 81.
So you'll see in my comments to that article that we think the article is legally defective.
Yeah,
I just wanted to remind the Finance Committee of that comment because under the regulations, I should say under state law, the authority to adopt parking regulations can either be by general bylaw or by a regulation of the select board. What you cannot do is subject a regulation of the select board to approval by town meeting. I hope you understand that distinction. Okay.
I did, but if I was asked in court, I'd probably have to have a primer before I could. Okay. So, notwithstanding the interest of the sponsor nor the personal pluses or minuses to such a bylaw, I would offer that if it's legally defective, we potentially do not need to spend too much time discussing it. Would that be a fair conclusion?
I don't know, Chris, you might want to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of thought on Bob's. I mean, I don't know that that is a sort of disqualifying factor for our discussion of it, because I think
Okay.
it could be amended, or the FinCom could be talked into a motion that was not legally defective, I think, within their motion. So
Can we do
I
that?
I may agree with your conclusion on this, but not your premise.
Well, if it's legally defective,
Well, that's a question. Can it be cured in a motion?
yeah, because if it can't be cured, then my understanding of legally defective means always legally defective.
Well, and then I'm going to have
So-
we'll have an interesting conversation on the one that I'm recused on, that I am the
I know,
Sponsor.
I realize that.
The question of can it be legally cured is a decision I think you all know that the moderator makes.
Okay,
And the reason for that is that any motion can be made under an article as long as it's within the scope.
Yes.
And the practice here in Nantucket, because you guys have a fabulous moderator, I'm just going to do a shout out for Sarah. I think she's great. She would likely confer with me if that question was raised.
Okay.
And I think the consideration that would go into answering that question is whether a voter in town who was sitting by the fireplace reading the warrant read that article and was sufficiently warned that a motion might be made that would really change the basic premise of that article. Now, she might say that's within the scope, and I would always defer to the moderator
Okay.
under that circumstance.
Okay.
Is that a non-answer?
No, so you're saying that on the day, potentially, the moderator could work with the article sponsor to
Craft a motion
craft
that
a
would be,
motion
that would be
then-
within the scope.
that would be within the scope and not legally defective. It'd have to be the and not legally defective part for me.
I would want to see how the sponsor crafted the motion before answering that last part.
Okay.
Because this is a very delicate area, because town meeting and the select board have dual authority here.
Okay.
And believe it or not, there's not a tremendous amount of case law out there in terms of what happens when, the select board goes one way and town meeting goes another way. It's all explained in my opinion letter, Denise, that I provided. So that's the best I can answer.
Can I ask you another question? Kind of, it's a little similar to this, but for people for sponsors who are saying that they will amend their articles, but they don't give us their amendments, can they amend their article on the town floor, town meeting any way they want to? And it's up,
Yes,
it's
I
up to
believe-
the
I
discretion of the
believe
moderator, right?
The practice here is that if there's a recommendation to take no action, I believe Sarah will give the sponsor an opportunity to make a positive motion. That's my recollection. And that's certainly fine. Anyone can make a motion on an article. The only caveat is it has to be within the scope. Excuse me? Oh, yeah. Yeah. And she will require that it be in writing, and that certainly is my recommendation as well. Because you need to have exactly, especially when you're doing a bylaw or something that's going to have legal consequences, it has to be in writing, and everyone has to know in the record what was voted.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. 6 o'clock. So we didn't make any rulings on 63 or 64, affordable housing requirements, public property damage.
Affordable housing.
Yeah, no,
requirements
63 and
Oh,
64
yes, we did. Yes, we
Yeah.
did, sorry. I just
Just-
didn't put it on my notes.
Nothing on.
The merchandise and
81.
wares we did. 81 we didn't. We didn't discuss it yet. And we did not discuss yet so those were the ones from tonight. We still have obviously many open ones. So I would suggest we either draw a line under it tonight for 6 o'clock, and then we just start going through them one by one next week, the ones that we can, or we try to do a couple more tonight. What is the appetite for another 15 minutes? Gas-powered leaf blowers as an example.
You want to do that now?
I don't want to. I have sick people at home.
Okay.
I'd like to go home too.
Can I ask
I do
a
too.
question?
I
Is this
would-
the last
my daughter's
opportunity
sick.
we're going to have with town council at one of these sessions?
Yes, it is. So do you want to do yours?
No, I want to let people go who are planning to go.
No,
to
no,
six
no.
o'clock.
But I mean-
I would actually prefer
To do that one?
Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I mean,
Let's
it might be pretty quick, actually.
Okay.
I mean, because we've just discussed what is the.
So Chris is recusing himself.
I'm recusing myself. We just,
Okay, thank you,
Sorry,
Chris. That's all right. You have to move.
Okay.
No, you go first. This is like chip and
So, I
tail
mean, we
here.
just discussed the germane issue, I think, facing the article that I'm bringing, which differs a little bit from the one that Mr. DaCosta brought, because as I understand it from reading the response, the one I'm bringing is legally defective because of exactly what town council mentioned, that town meeting cannot take away the select board's right without town meeting's approval to enact a regulation. But it's not legally defective along the lines of there has not been a regulation put in place yet, which is the issue that Bobby's have, if I understand it correctly. So I have been trying to reach town moderator without success to get at this scope issue.
Okay.
Because in fact, what I originally intended to ask for was a moratorium over a period of years, not a requirement of a town meeting vote, but actually a bylaw of a moratorium on paid on-street parking. In the back and forth and the rush before the filing, Libby was really nice and really helpful as she was running to the boat to sort of help me figure this out, and we ended up getting it wrong together, I think. And then I switched and said, because the message I got was, if you're asking if town meeting can require a vote of town meeting, the answer is yes. So that's when I switched to make a requirement of town meeting, which would, in my mind, would have had the same effect. So I've been trying to get the town moderator to say an amendment, either just banning, or I'm even okay with a moratorium of a certain period of years that would lapse. Is that within the scope? And that's where I'm at. And I won't go into the merits of the argument because you guys have heard me ad nauseum on that.
Okay. John, did you want to weigh in on what Chris just said?
I think he has sick people at home. He's got to go.
I don't think you're likely to get a positive vote for people who are trying to get out of here.
So with all due respect, I do not. I would want to talk to the moderator
Okay.
because it's her call,
Okay.
and I don't want to stand in her shoes and say something that's going to box her into a particular position.
Okay.
I don't think that's fair to her, and I don't think it's appropriate.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
I'll just add one other thing. I have been told that it's likely the select board may bring forth regulations between now and town meeting that would make this a moot point in the fact that they got there first with the regulation. I don't know if we're 100% clear because you said there's not a lot of law on this.
No, but I think we said that in our letter.
Yeah, no, you did, and I acknowledge that, and you
wish the
and Libby had
moratorium
highlighted for
one
me
came, though.
that at the outset as well.
I would have liked.
We'll see if that happens. You know, Selectman Fee told me he welcomes this debate on town meeting floor, and you know he's one of the larger proponents of the paid parking. So maybe the select board will decide to wait and hear the will of town meeting on this before they enact those regulations. If they do, then I guess we're just going to end up in one of those flaky will of the meeting, how the town feels kind of thing. And I think I know what we're going to hear, but.
I mean, Chris, I would have loved this to have been a moratorium. This would have been a much more.
That was my intention originally.
That would be such a easier thing to.
Would have been a good option, I think.
Why?
It's too bad.
Give it some time because there was so much public outcry at this topic when it was first introduced at the select board. I attended, and I attended on TV. I watched by TV anyway. And I just think there's homework that needs to be done, and so therefore the moratorium gives some breathing room to both sides of the argument to work it through and understands that people are really trying to work it through.
Oh, excuse me, I didn't mean to
That's
interrupt
why-
you. My
no,
view is a
that's-
pretty
that's why.
significant moratorium, though. I know the select board has already put this off a year, so I don't want to confuse matters there with them saying, "Hey, we already kind of imposed our own moratorium."
Sure.
Because I don't mean put off a year to work around the edges, which is kind of the way it's been determined. You know, we'll try to get on the same page with the chief. We'll tweak the technology. We'll find a way to park in front of the post office. I mean a moratorium to really have a cooling off and say, we don't need this now. Let's take 5 years, but let's let it lapse because if some, rather than have it go on in perpetuity, you get another shot at this, but not for a pretty considerable amount of time.
Okay.
So I just want to be clear on my intentions on that.
Thank you. Where do we stand in terms of a motion on this?
May I ask another question?
Sure,
Which is
of
just,
course.
Libby, what's Sarah's usual practice on, do you think there will be is there a set time when I'd be able to get to her? Or what's our process for her sort of taking amendments?
That is really a question for her, but usually the week or two before.
So it doesn't come to the very end.
Focuses on it, but I know that you have reached out to her, and I imagine she's just swamped with everything.
No, I get it. I'm just wondering in terms of, if I knew I could get resolved with her now, then I might make a different appeal to Finance Committee as opposed to having them have to make a decision.
So should we wait? I mean,
Yeah, I
Why don't we
think,
wait
I
and
think
vote?
the matter's important enough, and also out of courtesy, we could wait.
okay.
If he's trying to get an opinion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Until he
look, if
gets
you're
one.
convinced it's either one of those things is a bad idea, then go ahead and
I
vote
think
it,
we
you
can,
know.
Well,
from my
wouldn't-
perspective, we can wait.
Wouldn't
unless-
this have an impact on the Harbor Place design and all the things down there as well? And we're authorizing money for that, I think, so.
We're authorizing money for design,
Yeah.
but not for
For
the.
design, but I'm not sure
for
the design is
preliminary.
contingent on paid parking.
Yeah, but it's gonna include some, well, I guess we don't know.
It might include a garage. Maybe it's a free garage. I don't know.
The Harbor Place. It's the 500,000 for the study of how it should be.
So I thought it might impact that.
150,000.
150. Oh, where did I get the 500 from, Brian? Oh, okay.
And this doesn't unpack that at all, I assure you.
Maybe we should do paid parking there.
I'm not too sure it's too many of the residents. Okay, so, yep, go ahead.
I would probably be taken to task if I didn't mention this now. The board has a public hearing scheduled for paid parking regulations on February 19th.
Exciting. Thank you.
What?
Select Board is going to have a public hearing on paid parking regulations on February 19th. Get your seats early. It will be my observation from the last time. If you want to be in the front.
Be Denise and watch from home.
That's awesome. It's possible. Okay, so thank you, everybody, for tonight. And motion to adjourn.
Motion adjourned.
Second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.